because I was always, even though like I'm having trouble understanding certain things, it's weird because I grew up on the internet.
Mm.
You know, like I was playing video games on the internet. I was talking to people around the world. I thought it was so cool. And when things started going a certain way and reading these books, I was like, people don't get what a fundamental change the internet is
Sure.
for the
Yeah,
world.
definitely.
Especially like boomers. You know, it's very hard to, because them it's like it's just email, right? It's like it's just, I mean, just writing words down and you can see it. What's the difference?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's completely different. It's game changing.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I mean is I think that there's even more than usual. Like every generation, right? Like you get a couple generations removed and grandparents aren't going to understand their grandchildren, right? But I think that because of that, there's a unique and like very distinct cultural gap that's happening between the generations, because I think the big thing is not just being an internet native, but being a social media native.
Mm.
Because when I got a Tumblr, it legitimately changed my life, because everyone on there is like, there are a lot of gay people and there are a lot of really liberal people and there are a lot of really funny people. And so there's all of this stuff, but like, so now I'm suddenly being, you know, politically, right? Like I'm being exposed to ideas that I've never heard of otherwise. But that formed the way that I talk and part of my sense of humor. Like I know whether or not somebody was on Tumblr through like specific years because of whether or not like, you know, like certain things are funny to them. Or if I say something like, I like your shoelaces. Literally, if I said that to somebody that like had and actively used a Tumblr from 2013 to like 2017, they would die. They would drop dead on the spot.
We were talking a little bit about this earlier when I was saying how it's strange how a lot of humor for like the Zoomers is contextual. You know, you're not going to understand. You know, I like PewDiePie. I only got into him because of the controversy that happened with him, and I was interested, and I looked into him, and I was like, this guy's funny. He's a dumb comedian.
Yeah.
Right. He's making stupid videos. It's hilarious. But there's a lot of jokes on there that you won't get unless you watch them pretty regularly, right? And it's the same thing with memes and certain subcultures on the internet. And there's this sort of, the thing that I can't grasp is how Zoomers, for lack of a better word, know about the other subcultures memes. You know what like I understand why the boomers and myself are like, I don't get that, but at least the boomers I think stop there because they can't understand the contextual nature of the comedy. I go to, it must be funny to them because of something I don't get. But it seems like the Zoomers just know. Like it's so bizarre. It's like you can't all be part of this one thing,
But
can
that,
you?
But
They're
that's the thing is that like there really is like it fundamentally, even my friends that like I can tell a difference in my friends based on when they got a phone and when they got social media. Because that was something that parents hadn't really dealt with before. They were like, okay, when do I give my kids a smartphone?
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Like, so I was one of the ones that tended to get things like that, have freedoms to do stuff like that more than a lot of my other friends. So as a result, I like that's more deeply saturated into who I am. So I can't like absurdist humor kills me. Absolutely. Like I can look at an image that's just entirely deep fried and like doesn't make any sense.
Nope.
And
None.
you have to like, I saw a meme yesterday that I counted because I was curious. You had to know 7 separate memes to understand what was happening and have the cultural context to like put all of those pieces together.
That's my boy.
That's pretty funny.
It was a really popular post too. It was a popular post.
It's funny because it's not only relevant there anymore. You know?
Yeah.
Exactly. That's the big point, is the fact that memes have become much more of a mainstream thing where it's
Donald Trump, man.
It's culturally recognized. Yeah, it's culturally recognized. No matter who you are, no matter what you believe in, you always find some weird, strange image of like someone yelling at a cat that just makes so much sense. that you have to share it. And like I totally get it too because we've all been there. Like that one, like
We've all-
yeah, you're just yelling at the fucking cat. It's just like I get it.
So,
You know?
so how old are you guys?
24.
I'd rather not say. I'm 25. I just
All
turned
right,
25.
so you guys are like on the edge of millennials,
Sadly.
right? I'm on the upper edge of millennials.
Sure.
So I've talked to the Chromoscope guys about this because they're close to age with you guys.
They're like a couple
maybe,
years.
Yeah,
older
couple
than
years
us,
slightly
older,
older
right?
than you
yeah.
guys. But so I was right on the edge of Gen Y, I guess.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and so my friends were more Gen Y growing up, but I had experience like you where I didn't have a phone, but I was, because of the type of person I was and what I found interesting, I was on the internet far more than most people when I was younger because I thought it was fascinating. I was fascinated by computers. I was fascinated by the idea that I could talk to somebody on the complete opposite side of the planet.
Yeah.
I thought it was neat that I could cooperate with someone in a video game in ways that, you know, that you couldn't previously. It was interesting to me to get different perspectives on the world.
Mhm.
But because of that, I feel like it helped me. I now connect almost better with these younger millennials
Sure.
because they grew up with that the
Yeah,
same way I
exactly.
did.
Yeah.
Whereas the people that I grew up with didn't.
Yeah.
And it really did have an effect. And I feel like you're experiencing the exact same thing. And you'll probably be able to, because you're like an older Gen Zer, you'll probably be able to connect with younger Gen Zers in ways that your peers now might not.
Yeah. Like I can go on TikTok and like understand what's happening and like make content that people enjoy.
So that's
Sure.
something we have in common is our generational encompassing, you know, our ability to span our entire generation and understand the previous one a little better. Because you're communicating with me very well.
Yeah.
Whereas with
This
some,
is great. I just
I
love
know,
this.
this is-
I love this exchange. You guys are like trying to figure each other out.
What is this strange
he's
creature?
like, he's like, I see you. I see you. He's just like, oh
You're
my
a real
God.
person. You're not synthetic.
it totally went on a different tangent there. It's just, it's,
But yeah,
it's
I
not
see what you
often
mean.
I get to talk to somebody who's
No,
20
exactly.
years old.
No,
You know,
I think
like-
I think that's the funniest thing about it though. Like as you get older, it's weird how like little you interact with.
Because it's weird. You don't want to be the creepy, weird old man
Yeah,
who's
yeah.
like
Dude, it's
injecting
hanging out at a
himself.
park in a few hours. It's really not. That
People really don't like it for some reason. I don't know.
I don't know what the big deal is, but like, yeah,
Was that ever an issue for you guys, the generational difference?
we didn't really hang out at many parks when we were.
Yeah,
What do you think?
That's surprising, actually.
Yeah, well,
No, I mean it wasn't an issue, but it was definitely like a thing that we
Yeah.
noticed and commented on. Obviously, like we touched on earlier, there's the practical side of like, okay, you know, we're playing bars. How
Yeah.
are we gonna get this
Yeah,
kid in
yeah.
who's under 21? But even just like stylistically and
Oh, yeah.
in the way like even in like our social media presence, like
Mhm.
I would just like make memes. Like if we had a show coming up, like I would just like find a picture that would like make a funny meme and
Yeah.
just like poorly Photoshop words onto it because that's funnier than good Photoshop. And then
Right,
just like
yeah.
then we just
Yeah.
like post it on the story.
There was a long time when like MS Paint was the best way to make something funny because
Yeah.
it was like I didn't care enough
Yeah.
to put any effort
Yeah.
into this, even if you did.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's weird. I want to ask you another question. I'm
Okay.
sorry, but
he's just like trying to
I'm
understand.
with
Trying to
it. No,
dissect this
I
guy.
feel like there's actually a very similar thing between us, and one of the things is because we're on the edge of these generations. I've always felt this sort of inherent. There's something to be learned from both ends of this. So the people older than me
Oh, yeah.
definitely have something that I could benefit from. I mean, that's more obvious to me. But the younger people also have something that they need to add into this. Whereas it's a little frustrating for me because I interact with people who seem to feel as though the other side's not listening. I feel that way politically. I feel that way in so many areas of my life where the
Yeah.
other they feel like the other side just doesn't get it. And it's like, well, yeah, probably not. You know, that's an opportunity for you to teach them something.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I wondered that because I can tell when we're talking about things that are different from the way you probably experience life in general in a standard day,
Mhm.
I can feel you sort of pondering it. Am I right?
Yeah.
You're like, that's interesting. How does that apply here? Or what can I add to this?
That's also the
like,
Jake Hite
right?
way.
Yeah,
That's just
I-
also like
Yeah.
we know Jake's
Yeah.
communication styles pretty well at this point.
Just take
and
a
know his
breath
way.
and go.
Yeah, Jake
he thinks about it.
Jake is kind of the
He's great at it,
ponder.
though.
Jake is I would say he's more meta. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Metacognitive than most people I know in that way. That's why we all tend to get along because I think we're all fairly metacognitive. Where like we kind of like take
I like that term,
yeah,
metacognitive.
yeah. Essentially like thinking about what you're thinking about.
I am the
Yeah,
same. This
yeah.
is why
Yeah.
we're probably getting along so
Right,
well.
right. I mean, you're a guy with a podcast. I would imagine most people with podcasts, to be honest, like very metacognitive people, because that's what we're doing. We're talking about thinking about things, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like, Jake is. We're all kind of like that. We could get in our own heads, but like Jake is, in that sense, for people who are very, because being metacognitive is like I think a good thing in the sense where if you think about what you're thinking about, then you can take inventory of that and then you can understand who you are better and you can understand what your biases and so on are. And I think like when Jake entered the band, there was an awkward like little bit of time where Alex and I were kind of like, oh shit, this guy's like actually younger. You know what I mean? like that means some things because like he's looking at us a certain way and like we're looking at him a certain way. And then over time, all of us just being kind of who we are in talking and dialoguing about things. It was it's that like kind of mentor
Yeah. Yeah.
on both sides kind of relationship of like we're learning about your side of things and like you're learning from us about other things, and it's just very, very interesting. I think that's in a lot of ways, which we kind of all talked about, like that's what pushed the band far towards the last part of us doing our thing, is because we were so shaken up by like different perspectives
Mhm.
across the board.
True.
You know what I mean?
I think it's a fundamental truth that if you're progressing in any domain, you inevitably have to become a teacher,
Sure.
because
Yeah.
it's
Absolutely.
and you won't progress any further until you accept that, because the only way to learn is from your student. You know,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it's a weird thing, but it's inevitable. I think that's what you're describing. It's like you hit
Yeah.
a plateau.
Yeah.
And also just in a practical sense, in outreach, like I can't speak to these younger people.
Yeah.
Sure.
I don't
Sure.
I don't know their language.
Yeah.
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 Well, and that's the thing, is that I have always been somebody like I like thinking about things, and I like thinking about how I think about
Me too.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I like being intentional about stuff like that. So I have my dad and I, right? He's a Christian and comes from the South, so he leans pretty conservative most of the time. Interpersonally, he has an incredible amount of compassion and kindness, and he would never do anything to directly harm somebody else.
Hmm.
But politically, he, like, the way that he sees things, like, sometimes, at least from my perspective, like, I see it as, oh, dad, like, this is harmful to these people for this reason. And because of, the wider perspective that I got exposed to younger, right? Like, he grew up through the 70s and 80s in North Carolina in a Christian family.
Mm.
So he's going to have like certain political like biases. And he's going to have a certain thought process for a lot of things. Whereas I grew up in Schenectady, in an underprivileged part of town that's like already kind of a melting pot in and of itself as far as like ethnicities and nationalities go, and then getting exposed to the internet and like pretty wide reaches of the internet too. For as much as I was on Tumblr, like I'd go check out 4chan sometimes and see what was happening on that hellhole. Like,
Yeah.
so now I do serve as a bridge between older. I find myself doing that a lot, and almost like being like a translator in some ways, because I can take and yeah, like I read a lot and I like being accurate with the things that I say. So I can take, these like abstract things that people my age are like talking about, and explain to somebody who's older and be like, hey, listen, like, even if it's something as innocuous as like, this is what this meme means.
Yeah.
But sometimes
Yeah.
like that's what it is.
That's really
I get
true.
exhausted.
You should
by
develop
that.
an app called the Meme
Honestly, though, like
Translator.
that,
Honestly,
that is a really big thing to really face though. Like I feel the same way with my parents. Like they're very much more right leaning, very much more conservative than I am. But they'll get outraged by something that they see online, and I kind of have to talk them down to it to a certain reason, to a
It's
certain
like,
extent.
that's obviously fake news.
Yeah,
There,
no.
there's a typo in the.
I'm the one who
in the
told my dad
URL.
the onion is the onion. Like I just like I'm
It's
not
like,
kidding.
where is this?
They were very outraged when they understood that satirical content like that is actually exists to
Because they're like
apparently-
we can't tell. They're like
Because-
we can't tell.
because to
You
a
know?
certain
It's
extent, when
like-
someone's raised to not to look at the internet for news, and they start looking at it for news because of thanks to Facebook, Instagram,
Yeah.
Twitter,
Yeah.
the entire onslaught, it makes it very difficult for someone older.
It's
And I
felt-
totally get that, you know.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like you need younger people to like really explain it to them in a really soft way to be like, hey, like it's not to like make you go nuts, you know. It's just like this is just how it is.
It's difficult.
It's
like
it's a certain form of like entertainment for someone else in a certain age
Yeah.
group.
I think it's
sometimes.
interesting, like even if as far as like cognitive pathways, I studied psychology in like college, so like I
Okay,
kind of like
cool.
talking about, but like in terms of like older folks and like how younger people perceive stimulus and information, I would say our brains are, because of social media, because of the internet, we are wired every day. Thousands of decisions we make are, does this matter or does it not matter? And or is this fake or is it truth?
Yep.
And older people do not think like that because their brains,
They
they,
don't
didn't
have
have
to
to
do
be
that.
wired like that.
just gonna say
Yeah.
that it's
Like-
hard to explain because I mean when I try to explain that it's like trying to tell someone to chew.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
it's like I don't know.
You have
You
to-
just
you
do
just-
it. I don't.
Yeah.
You know,
Just
open
put the
close,
food in your
open
mouth.
close.
Just
You know,
eat it.
like and knowing when to swallow. It's
Yeah,
the, it's
yeah.
exact same
That always
sort
screws
of.
me up, actually.
Pat just like keeps putting food in
He
his
keeps
mouth,
eating.
and then just like
I kept
his
telling
mouth
him
is
to
just
stop.
full.
Yeah.
It works as an analogy
Yeah.
because you are consuming. You know,
Sure.
you're consuming
Yeah. Sure,
media.
yeah,
It's-
yeah,
it's- you're like, is this edible?
Yeah.
Is this? How do you teach someone
Yeah.
that? It's very, 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 very difficult. And on the same end, I can feel myself being separated from these young people, being like, I don't understand this.